Hello everybody, my name is Remington Huggins and I'm here with one of the best public adjusters in the entire state of Georgia, Mr. Mathew Mulholland. He hates it when I call him that. It's Mulholland for everybody out there. Let's cut it. Mr. Mathew Mulholland from All Good Adjustments. And we're going to be here today in the middle of summer on a roof in the state of Georgia. And the reason why we're doing that is because of the unfortunate circumstances surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. But that did not stop me and Mathew right here to give you a presentation on site.
Yeah, so we're up here looking for some kind of coverage. And when you can't find the obvious things, what are you going to do? We all live in a state that doesn't have an enormous amount of hail damage. There's not an enormous amount of wind damage. This isn't Texas. So as a PA, we have to get a little bit more detailed into the policy language. So let's talk about this roof. I'm out here risking my life. So we're on this gravel and tar pitch roof. It's a built-up roof. There's multiple layers. And like most contractors and PAs, we were looking for storm damage. We're in an area that was hit with a tornado about 2 miles away. There was limited hail that came out of that storm. I'm thinking maybe there's hail and wind. Looking around, I got nothing. This particular type of roof actually heals wounds when it gets hot. So if there was hail damage on it, it's not here anymore. I'm looking at the edges, I don't see any wind. The accessories on the roof don't have any dents in it. I don't have any hail and wind damage. Most PAs and roofers give up at that point, but not I say. We went down inside, and the insured actually called us out because there was an abrupt water loss inside. So we're looking up at the underside of the roof from inside, and we see that the roof deck, which is a concrete deck, has broken in one place. So we get back on the roof and we're looking for impact damage. And something must have hit this roof in order to cause the deck to break. Right. There's no impact marks anywhere. So was the roof deck damaged because of defective materials? Was it improper installation? I don't know. And if it is that, then is there coverage?
That's the question we're going to be talking about today. And for the coverage that you're going to find when there's actually an excluded type of loss is what's called the ensuing loss clause. There we go. Now you might ask yourself, where did the ensuing loss come from? What did that term or actual coverage come from? And it dates back to 1906 in San Francisco, California. There was a massive earthquake. And the result of the earthquake started pipes burst and gas came from the pipes and it started a fire. Okay, fires all through San Francisco. So they actually broke down the differences in the two between earthquake and fire. And it came out that there was $80 million worth of earthquake damage in San Francisco. However, there was $400 million worth of fire damage in San Francisco. The insurance carriers said, no, we're absolutely not paying for the fire damage. It stemmed from the earthquake, and I am sorry, insureds, but we're not going to pay this. The legislation for the state of California stepped in and said, you know what? If there is an exclusion, and the result of an exclusion actually has a peril that is covered within the policy, you, Mr. Insurance Company, must pay these insureds. And so that's when it was enacted. Over 100 and roughly 15 years ago, that came into play. And if it wasn't for those earthquakes and fires, potentially Matt maybe not would have had this roof approved for his actual client. So, sometimes devastation happens and good things result from it.
If you want more information about the earthquake, you should go see Bob Casper. He was alive back then. I'm sure he could give you some more information.
Yep, he has actual live video from it. So just give him a call.
He painted it.
Yeah,
as it was happening.
He painted it as it was happening. So give Bob a call.
So once we figured out that the roof deck partially collapsed, then we had to see, was there any kind of an effect on the roof? So we came up and we did a core sample, so to speak. But we did a 2 by 2 foot area. We took out just a big square of all the materials. Gave us an opportunity to see what all the layers were so that we could scope the loss properly, but also it allowed us to get all the way down to the poured concrete that's on top of the double T's that the roof deck is made of. When we opened it, which was right here, we were able to see that the poured concrete, which was a lightweight concrete, right, which as I understand is unusual.
It is unusual.
So the lightweight concrete had a crack in it that was a couple of millimeters apart and slightly offset by a couple of millimeters. So a very small disparity, but that does prove that that section did fall in a little bit. When we opened it up, there was a ton of moisture. We were able to lift up parts of the insulation that's inside, and it would just pour water out of it as we lifted it up. It was insane how much water is saturating the substrate in this roof.
Yeah.
There is probably asbestos in a few of these layers. We've sent it off to the lab to get tested. We haven't got the results back yet, but I anticipate we're going to have asbestos at some point.
Mathew did in All Good Adjustments is what we call destructive testing. It's somewhat of a lost art now, but I think it's the best way to actually get inside of a roof and see exactly, first off, what it's made out of, and second off, what are the damages. Because if you're looking out on the outside, you're just only assuming what is in the inside. This gives actually the policyholder, for instance, we wouldn't know how many plies a particular roof would be unless there's destructive testing and things of that effect, which it helps you with your exactimate estimate by putting exactly what was on that roof from before and have it the perfect estimate for what the insurance carrier should actually be applying coverage towards.
The question that brings up is whether or not that testing is covered by the policy. So in my experience, once we get coverage for the claim, then an invoice from a contractor that provided that destructive testing would get paid for. But if they don't end up paying coverage for the claim, a lot of times they don't pay for that destructive testing at all. And if the public adjuster is the one that does the destructive testing, they don't pay for it at all anyway.
Right. No, Matthew's exactly right. And if you are going to do destructive testing on one of your roof surfaces of your client, I would certainly put the insurance carrier on notice. I'd put it in writing, tell them exactly what you're doing, the date you're doing it, invite them to the party to do the destructive testing, and go forward. At that point in time, I think it would be better covered or paid for by the actual insurance company as well. And you could argue, just because mitigating your damages is obviously a priority that the insurance, that the policyholder needs to take care of, and you could argue that to make sure that you're mitigating the property completely, you need to do this destructive testing.
Yeah. Interesting note about this claim. After we did that, and they agreed that there was a partial collapse, even though they said it wasn't an abrupt or sudden collapse, they said that the only way for us to know if it was abrupt or sudden, which would open up the collapse coverage in the policy, was to open the roof back up in a larger area and chisel out the lightweight concrete to see the top of the flange of that double T.
Right.
But this was before I got coverage for the roof. They were not willing to pay for that destructive test unless coverage ended up being provided as a result of that test. So we decided not to go down that route until we got the coverage to begin with. And once we got the coverage, it was kind of pointless to do. Once they agree to pay for the roof, it's coming off anyway. We can, at that point, take a look at the top of the flange of the double T and figure out if there's going to be an abrupt collapse language or not.
Right.
I fangirl about this claim.
This is what we call mitigating damages. 101.
Looks like coffee.
Yes, I was going to say Coca-Cola.
So we didn't find any hail damage or wind damage on the roof. What we did discover is that the roof deck had partially collapsed, slightly fallen. Now, the first time over here, we actually didn't recognize that. It took some use of a very expensive specialty tool that I happened to already own in order to discover that there was a slight drop. But once we found out that there was a drop, then we really had to find out what caused it. And once we found out what caused it, then there was the discussion of whether there was coverage. Now, with this particular claim, the cause of loss was one of three things. Either it's wear and tear, improper installation, or defective materials. If it was wear and tear, the ensuing loss provision of the policy under wear and tear required any resulting loss to be a specified cause of loss. If it was defective materials or improper installation, then the ensuing loss could be any covered cause of loss. So we would have preferred it not to be wear and tear, but it is what it is when you get into these things.
Right,
So,
right. And the engineer did take a look at this loss. Is that accurate?
so we had, the carrier sent out Donan, and the first time that Donan came out, we hadn't at that point discovered that there was a partial collapse. The only thing that we could see was that there was a discrepancy in the height of the one double T flange versus the one next to it. And there was some inaccurate information in the engineer's report as a result, because he didn't know everything, we didn't know everything. We ended up coming back out again with my extremely expensive specialty tool, a piece of plastic that is also a protractor. I think this came with a really crappy crown molding apparatus or something that I was trying to do.
The question is, does it work?
It did. So it was perfect. The rounded edge on this fit into the rounded edge of the support beam on the double T. And so we were able to put one end on the flange and one end on the vertical components of the double T and see what the angle for the flange was.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, almost everything was at roughly 91 degrees, and just almost every single one was at 91 degrees. It might have been off by a half to a whole degree, but it was roughly 91. The one in question was at 94. So we got to see they had dropped roughly 3 degrees.
Right.
And so in that area that had dropped 3 degrees, we started measuring back to see how far back that 3-degree discrepancy was, and about 12 feet back from the furthermost, they've called this the northernmost edge, it was 91 degrees again. So the corner had dropped slightly. So because that corner had dropped, it was considered a partial collapse according to the policy. It met the definition of a partial collapse. The collapse coverage doesn't kick in unless that partial collapse is abrupt or sudden.
Right.
And the engineer said it wasn't. So I didn't have collapse to work with. All I had was the ensuing loss.
Okay. So a Donan engineer didn't say that this was sudden damage. That's surprising. Gotta say.
He also said like 5 times that it wasn't storm related because he had no idea what to write in there to help the adjuster out.
And regarding what Matt said about the ensuing loss, again, it's an exception to an exclusion. And for me to explain that, he said this could possibly be wear and tear. We all know, being in this industry, wear and tear is an exclusion. However, the exception to the exclusion is that if wear and tear, the result of the wear and tear is a specified cause of loss, it's covered. And I don't have a policy in front of me, so I can't say exactly the specified causes of loss, but typically in a policy, the listing of a specified causes of loss is really just one paragraph, and it lists them with commas, compared to the other perils he talked about, which are pretty detailed, listed independently, such as like hail, hailstorms, things like that.
If it turns out to be wear and tear, then it has to have that specified cause of loss.
Correct.
Which you'll describe in detail about what that involves. But if it was the result of faulty installation, defective materials, anything along those lines that fall under negligent work section, that's excluded.
Right.
Anything that results from that exclusion that is itself not excluded. A covered cause of loss that results from that then becomes the ensuing loss that is covered by the policy. So for an open peril policy, that just means anything that isn't itself excluded. So with this, the damage occurred to the roof. There was a dropping because of a void that was created when the flange of the double T fell down. There was a dropping of the lightweight concrete slightly, and that allowed the layers of the membrane to drop slightly and allow moisture intrusion from above. And once moisture got into the substrate, causes all those blisters, ended up with ruptured blisters and a ton more water intrusions, and it spread throughout the thing. Now, this definitely occurred over a period of time, but the policy's been in place for a long time. The coverage still exists. How they determine when this actually occurred, I don't know.
I don't think anybody's going to be able to determine that. Would you agree if the actual exclusion is wear and tear, that it's more difficult to get an ensuing loss covered compared to the actual faulty workmanship, things of that effect?
Absolutely. Actually, most policies that have ensuing loss under the wear and tear section do have that specified cause of loss description. And most of the time when we're talking about an ensuing loss, we're almost always talking about an ensuing fire or ensuing water damage.
Right.
And fire is one of the specified causes of loss, but the water damage has to be from an appliance or a plumbing system. And the roof is not an appliance or a plumbing system.
Right.
So it wouldn't be covered here. It would be covered for that if it was wear and tear in an old plumbing system that caused some kind of a leak.
Exactly.
So, but that's not this case.
Right, right. And there's just a ton of instances wear and tear, such as I see it all the time in all states, coverage determinations where they're paying for 5 interior rooms with interior damage, but they will not pay $1 towards the roof. Is that somewhat of a wear and tear?
That's exactly the ensuing loss provision. If the flashing was installed incorrectly, improper installation is excluded, but the interior loss resulting from it is included. If the wear and tear provision doesn't have the specified cause of loss language, they
Right.
have a rotten pipe boot or something that allows water to come in, then they would have coverage for the interior loss that results from it, but they wouldn't pay to replace the pipe boot.
Right.
So the excluded part of it wouldn't be paid for. For this claim, we ended up determining that it was not a abrupt collapse. So the collapse coverage didn't come into play. It was determined to either be defective materials or brain farts. It was determined
Faulty workmanship.
That's what it was. Yeah. So it was determined to either be defective materials or faulty workmanship, improper installation. So
Right.
when they installed this, they might have installed it wrong, or the concrete in the double T is bad or has too much moisture in it and allowed it to break easier. Because it was one of those two that falls under the negligent exclusion in the policy, then the ensuing loss that isn't itself excluded is covered. So we got the roof approved on this, but the policy doesn't pay for the actual double T concrete roof deck to be repaired. So the insurance is going to have to come out of pocket for that, but the whole roof is an ensuing loss that's covered.
Right.
Fix my tone. This is Remington every 5 minutes.
Gotta make sure we're good. Gotta make sure we're good. Who am I every 5 minutes? Yep.
We all have our flaws. So the roof that we're standing on is another ensuing loss claim. It's a mod bit roof, which is a granulated roll roofing membrane on top of sheets of OSB that are mechanically fastened through a whole separate roof system, a gravel tar pitch roof over a 3-ply built-up.
Right.
Under that is a 1-inch fiber board and then metal roof deck. So the original built-up roof with the gravel pitch was on here, and when they recovered it with the mod bit, it was installed incorrectly. So let me tell you a story of how we got involved. The insured filed the claim originally for wind damage.
Okay.
Because a tornado went through 50 feet in front of this building.
So 50 feet on that side of the building, tornado went through.
Directly across the street.
Wow.
So they filed for wind damage. The contractor talked him into doing that. And the adjuster came out and said, no wind damage. They sent an engineer out who said wear and tear was the cause of loss. And then they called me. And we came out and we took our own inspection. And we didn't find any wind damage either. I wanted to. A tornado was across the street.
Right.
But there's no wind damage on this. There's ridging, which is wrinkles that appear in the gaps of the underlayment. It can cause wherever you have like a sheet of OSB is like a 4x8, you'll see ridging along the 4x8 lines. You see that all over this. And when there's ridging, similar to a blister, it can crack or open up on the top. That kind of thing can happen if the roof isn't fully adhered to the decking properly.
Right.
This wasn't overlapped properly in certain areas. The edges weren't installed correctly. There's a lot of problems. Believe it or not, this is a 5-year-old roof. If it's 5 years old, could it be wear and tear?
I have a hard time believing that.
I did too. So we argued that how could there be wear and tear if it's only 5 years old? We believe it's improper installation. And they said, okay, why does that matter? And I said, well, it's definitely not wear and tear. Because if it's wear and tear, then we have that specified cause of loss language for the ensuing loss that we didn't want to deal with.
Right.
We wanted the open peril language that as long as it's not excluded, we're set. So we convinced them to bring the engineer back out, and we showed the engineer all the damage, tried to convince him that some of the ridging was wind, because why not? He's here.
Right.
Obviously, I was unsuccessful, probably because I didn't believe it myself. But then we definitely told him that the roof was only 5 years old, that a 5-year-old mod bit roof should not have signs of wear and tear.
Right.
With the amount of patchwork that's on this roof and the way the seams are lined up, they're not even staggered. Some of them are going the opposite direction. It was very obvious to both the engineer and to us that it was improper installation. We opened up the roof just over here, and with the destructive testing, we're able to see that this was a roof that was installed on top of the gravel tar pitch.
Right.
And that there was a substrate, the fiberboard, that was saturated. Now the OSB was also saturated. Engineer then changed his mind about it being wear and tear and put in writing that the mod bit roof was installed improperly and allowed water intrusion into the gravel tar pitch built up roof. So you see what he did there?
Right.
Separated the two roofs in his report for me. So the hard part with ensuing loss is getting them to separate what is the excluded portion and what is the ensuing loss.
Right.
If the top roof, the mod bit, was installed incorrectly and the built-up gravel tar pitch roof was installed at a separate time and it was damaged as a result of this one being installed incorrectly, then the built-up roof is part of the ensuing loss.
Absolutely.
If they say it's all part of the roof system that was installed incorrectly, then you got a big fight on your hands. So trying to figure out where that limit is, where that line is really the biggest fight for ensuing loss claims.
Yeah.
So here's my thoughts on it. Built-up roof was installed when the building was built. It was
Correct.
original. It was installed as a roof system at that time. The mod bit roof was installed at a completely separate date. I don't see how you could tie those two together. What do you think about that?
No, I would agree. And what you have done is actually made coverage for the policyholder, and what EFI Global did from the engineer. I know that's what you wanted him to say, and he said it himself and separated those two different structures or systems, if you will. And since this roof right here that was put on, the latest roof 5 years ago, is the defective actual system on the structure, it allows for the coverage for the actual original roof that's on this building.
Yeah, in order to replace the fiberboard that was saturated as the ensuing loss, we have to get this layer off. So part of the access to the ensuing loss involves replacing the thing that was actually excluded to begin with.
So really what Matt did was he got coverage for 2 roofs when actually everything was denied in the first place.
Well, don't go that far. We did get removal of both, but the built-up roof is considered an abandoned layer.
Okay.
The abandoned layer doesn't necessarily have to go back on. So they removed both, and now we're installing the mod bit, but we're doing the mod bit correctly. So there is some code-related items, building up enough insulation for the energy code and all that kind of stuff. But the abandoned layer argument is an interesting thing in itself, because you're not really going back to a pre-loss condition.
Right.
But you are going back to a code compliant condition with whatever layer is on top.
And it's a condition that's better for the actual owner of the structure as well. He's got now one roof system, not an abandoned roof system, on below a system that's actually not put on properly at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So we got coverage first for the interior, like we usually do.
Yeah.
Once they agree to the interior damage, even if they don't immediately agree to the ensuing loss for that second layer of roof, once they provide that coverage, they've opened the door for the ensuing loss, because that's what that interior damage is covered under.
Right.
It is the ensuing loss of this, and now we just have to separate the two roofs.
Absolutely.
So here's another one in the books. Ensuing loss, it's something most people don't really know about. This policy says, we will not pay for loss or damage caused by or resulting from any of the following, B3A through B3C. B3C is negligent work. It has the faulty, inadequate, or defective workmanship, construction, planning, all that kind of stuff. So improper installation falls under negligent work. That does not pay for loss or damage caused by the negligent work, but if an excluded cause of loss that is listed in B3A through B3C results in a covered cause of loss, we will pay for the loss or damage caused by that covered cause of loss. So for this particular claim, there were 2 roof coverings. There was the older roof covering, which was a built-up tar-pitched gravel roof, and laid on top of that were sheets of OSB and mod bit roll roofing. And the mod bit roll roofing covering was severely bad. That was great English. It was installed poorly, to say the least. So it was faulty, inadequate, negligent work. And the engineer wrote in the language that the mod bit roof was installed incorrectly over top of the built-up roof. So he separated those 2 roofs in his language in the engineer report, which really helps us out. When we're talking about an ensuing loss, sometimes the hardest part is segregating where one loss ends and the other one begins. If we can separate those 2, it makes the ensuing loss argument a lot better. Where does the damage caused by this excluded loss start where it becomes covered?
Yeah.
By separating those 2 roofs, it made it very apparent. The mod bit roof was installed incorrectly. The built-up roof was damaged as a result.
And I really want you to pay attention to what Matt just did on this claim. He literally took where, for instance, the improperly installed roof itself. We all know that that is not covered under the policy, nor is the insurance company have to pay to replace that faulty installed roof itself. However, what Matt just said is that the actual most recent installed roof itself is separate from the original roof that was under the actual just rolled roof itself. And therefore, since it is separate, it's not, the first roof itself wasn't faultily installed itself. So now the insurance company is going to have to replace that second roof. And guess what? To do that, you're going to have to replace the actual most present roof.
If they start arguing about whether or not they are the same roof system, the simplest argument, in this case anyway, is that the original roof was installed on this date, and the other roof that was negligently installed was installed on this date. Those are two completely separate events. The original roof wasn't improperly installed by the same crew that did the second one. So they are two separate losses, two separate events, two separate sections of the roof system, even though one of those layers would be considered an abandoned layer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the water came through as a result of the improper installation of the mod bit roof. It went through the built up roof, saturated the substrate, went through that into the building, saturated some paper face insulation in the drop ceilings. Drop ceilings were damaged, some walls got damaged. They are paying for all the interior. And then now, after a little bit of fight back and forth and teaching an insurance adjuster what ensuing loss means, they're paying for the built-up roof, but they're not paying for the mod bit. So the tear off and install of the mod bit is separated. I think I'll end up getting them to pay for the tear off of the mod bit as access to the built-up roof and other damage, but they probably won't pay to install it again. And this does lead to some interesting questions on what do they pay to replace the built-up roof with if it's an abandoned layer. Really, that can start getting into policy language and case law, and it's an interesting and completely separate training session.
Yeah,
because that's a huge one.
My canned response to that is the covered cause of loss damaged the actual original roof itself. So therefore, I believe the insurance policy would cover the original roof and the structure and the buildup of the original roof.
And that's what they're paying for.
Okay.
I don't know if that's why,
Yeah.
but that's what they're paying for.
There you go.
All right. We are on site at one of my clients' house. I've got Remington Huggins, the state's premier, awesome, semi-cool bearded lawyer in property damage with me. It's all right.
Thank you.
I'm rubbing off on you a little bit, hopefully. We're going to take a look at the loss inside to find out if we can tie it to some kind of coverage that's in the policy. It's not an easy or obvious claim by any means, so we really have to investigate this one. There's a leak below this bathroom floor. It's hidden from view. It's unknown to the insured. There's actually concrete just below this tile, poured concrete. So jumping up and down here also makes it unknown. It's not rotten, it doesn't flex. You don't feel a soft floor. So if it's hidden and it's unknown to the insured, most policies will cover that kind of damage, even if it is rot or seepage. So now we have to figure out where it's coming from. Is it coming from the toilet? Is it coming from the sink? Is it coming from the tub? Some policies will specify that there's coverage for one and not the other. We have to investigate further. The same similar issue. It's not visible from the bathroom that there's damage below this. There's some rot. So it's hidden from view, unknown to the insureds. So we know that there is a leak in this area somewhere below, and we have to determine if it's coming from that tub or that sink and how it is happening in order to see if there's coverage. So this particular policy has two exclusion sections, one that has anti-concurrent causation language in it, the other that doesn't. The section that doesn't have anti-concurrent causation excludes wear and tear, faulty, inadequate, defective construction, and seepage. The wear and tear language has an ensuing loss provision, and I think it's a really exceptional one. If because of any of these water escapes from a plumbing, heating, air conditioning, or automatic fire protection sprinkler system or domestic appliance, we cover a loss caused by the water. We also cover the cost of tearing out and replacing any part of the covered building necessary to repair the system or appliance, so access to the plumbing. We do not cover the loss to the system or appliance from which the water escapes, so they don't owe to repair the plumbing. That's traditional, but
right.
It doesn't limit it to a a non-excluded cause of loss. It just says if water escaped from a plumbing system because of one of these, and wear and tear is one of the issues, then they will cover the loss caused by the water. It doesn't then go on to say that unless it is excluded elsewhere in the policy, or unless it occurs over a period of weeks, months, or years, it just limits it to the loss caused by the water and access to that system for repairs.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really strong ensuing loss language because it really gives full coverage for any of the water damage that ensues from wear and tear. So there is cast iron plumbing on this one, older home,
right,
and the cast iron plumbing has rusted out or something along those lines, which is, under that same language, is rust and corrosion.
Yeah, because he said that they're the same pipes that was built back in 1950, I believe he said.
Something like that.
Yeah.
It was definitely older. And so now there is an ensuing loss. Now, it was unknown to the insured at the time because it was a rental property, and when the tenant actually told him about it, the dude was in the basement pumping iron, when someone flushed or hit the water or something, then they noticed the water loss, and it was called in immediately, but they said that it was excluded for seepage. Now, seepage exclusion is in here. Continues or repeated seepage or leakage of water from a plumbing, heating, air conditioning, or automatic fire protection sprinkler system, or from within a domestic appliance. The exact same language as the ensuing loss provision, which occurs over a period of weeks, months, or years. So they exclude repeated seepage or leakage from the plumbing system that occurs over a period of weeks, months, or years. But that is a separate exclusion from the wear and tear where they say they do cover the water caused, or the loss caused by the water. I don't think they interact with each other.
They don't. I don't think they do either. If they wanted seepage to be a excluded cause of loss stemming from wear and tear, they should have added it to this last paragraph at the very end.
I agree. When looking at the policy, we looked at other exclusions to see how they were written, and there are other exclusions that have ensuing loss provisions that limit things. There's another exclusion that's in the policy that has its own ensuing loss provision, and this one was actually added in through the limited fungi endorsement. So the exclusion reads, fungi, wet rot, dry rot, or bacteria, except as provided under the additional coverage. This exclusion does not apply to ensuing loss not otherwise excluded, resulting directly or indirectly from fungi, wet rot, dry rot, or bacteria. So because the ensuing loss language specifies here that it isn't otherwise excluded, or any ensuing loss that isn't otherwise excluded, since they use that language in this ensuing loss provision, then the writers of the policy clearly know that they have to limit that ensuing loss provision by non-covered causes of loss. And if they don't, then it must be covered.
Right.
They have two different styles of writing the ensuing loss language in the same policy. So there's no way for them to say that the spirit of the law, so to speak, in the ensuing loss provision for the wear and tear means that they don't cover anything that is otherwise excluded.
Yeah.
When this ensuing loss language specifies they don't cover it if it's otherwise excluded.
Right.
So I think that makes it much stronger.
I think it does too. Absolutely.
And, yeah. And so with this particular claim, we're looking really good. And the coverage exists in at least one of these bathrooms so far. And we're looking into the other one. It may end up being a separate claim.
Fantastic. Fantastic. We were in the bathroom earlier. You saw the floors, the tile floors. You couldn't see any damage. You couldn't even tell that there was a leak that was happening. You come under here and you can actually see the water, the moisture start to drip a little bit. Mm-hmm. And mind you that we turned the toilet back on. And about 6 inches above where this drip is, this floor is just completely rotted out. I mean, to the point it's just dangling wood. Just rotted. And within this actual policy itself, wear and tear is excluded, of course, as in every policy. However, it's stated if there is water damage from wear and tear, that is actually a covered peril within this policy. So Oh, you can see this water coming down right through here. This house was built in the early 1950s. So this piping right here, this black piping, iron pipe, is over 70 years old. That's wear and tear. We got Mathew right now crawling in a crawl space. It's about 3 foot, I would give him 2.5 foot tall. We just turned on the sink and there was a significant leak that was coming from the sink.
Video, quick. Why won't you do this? That is definitely coming from the sink, and it is bad. That is not a small, slow seepage leak.
Matt and I believe that is more of a sudden type loss than categorized as seepage over time. Would you agree with that, Matt?
Absolutely. Definitely see the drain going to the sink. And that's where the water is coming from. But that was a significant leak. That was a lot of water all over. And there's definitely some rot in there too.
Goal number 1 is to find the damage and where the leak is coming from. Goal number 2 is to make sure Matt's beard does not get dirty.
It is very important that we always keep goal number 2 in mind as if it's goal number 1.
It's now goal 1B. Members of DAPIA, if you really take into consideration the information that Matt and I are providing you regarding the ensuing loss, I truly believe that you will have more success as a public adjuster in the state of Georgia with having your clients' losses covered and for them to actually obtain proceeds themselves. So I ask you to do a little bit of homework. Look at what we looked at. Look at the policies that you have right now and see what we're talking about. Connect those dots. And once you connect the dots, this is just going to be ordinary language. You're going to be looking for this type of loss every time you go to a site.
Look good, man.
Matt, you look fabulous.
Okay, so we got some questions from Facebook forums and a few other PAs to try to dig into what the ensuing loss is. So the first question that we got was very simple. What is an ensuing loss and how does it affect a claim both positive and negative?
Well, it is a somewhat softball question, but it's a question where a lot of public adjusters and even attorneys kind of struggle with. And we did some research and I pulled up, this is a Georgia Court of Appeals and it's Henderson versus Georgia Farm Bureau Mutual Insurance Company. And the Georgia Court of Appeals actually defines ensuing loss as ensuing loss is one that follows or flows approximately from another loss. With the language within any policy, usually the ensuing loss is where there's actually an excluded loss that occurs, and then the damages that flow from that excluding loss, if those damages are actually a covered cause of loss, that's the actual covered loss itself in the ensuing loss provision in the policy.
So it can provide coverage for something that normally everything that is caused by that excluded loss is excluded. The ensuing loss could provide coverage for the resultant action or the resultant loss that wasn't there before. As far as that negative goes, I don't know of any negative thing that an ensuing loss provision would.
I can't think of any negatives that comes from an ensuing loss because it's essentially additional coverage that's provided to the insurance holder, the policyholder themselves, where actually an exclusion becomes payable at some point because of the results from that actual exclusion itself. So I can't think of any negatives either, Matt. The question itself did ask for positives, and I think we did hit on those. But the positives are that although there was a excluded cause of loss, the actual policyholder can actually recoup insurance proceeds.
Yeah, all right. Next question is, how does anti-concurrent causation language interact with the ensuing loss provision and which trumps which? This was actually broken down to me a little bit more when I was asking for a little bit more details on what they were looking for. So the anti-concurrent causation language is usually immediately following the section header of exclusions.
Right.
They'll say that they don't owe for any loss that is excluded, no matter what sequence or concurrent causation there is to the loss. So if there's one loss that is excluded and another loss that is not excluded that are acting concurrently or in a sequence to each other, then the excluded causal loss is still excluded, or it might even say that the entire loss is excluded.
Yeah.
According to some policies. So this is very policy specific, but in my opinion, the exclusionary language and the anti-concurrent causation language is very broad. It's for that entire section. If there's an ensuing loss provision under a specific exclusion, I think that that would trump the anti-concurrent causation language, because it is specifying that even though they exclude this cause of loss, that anything that is the result of that cause of loss would be included.
Yeah.
So I don't think the anti-concurrent causation language really come into play on that, because if it's depending on the language of the ensuing loss provision, I suppose. I have one loss where the ensuing loss provision says that they don't cover for wear and tear unless that wear and tear results in water escaping from a plumbing fixture, sprinkler system, or sewage system, and they would pay for the water damage. And that ensuing loss provision doesn't go on to say that they will only cover the ensuing loss that isn't excluded. It just says that they will pay for the water damage that results from the escape of water. Now, there is later on an exclusion for seepage, but that is a separate exclusion. And this says that they will cover water damage as a result of the ensuing loss.
Okay.
So that ensuing loss language pertains specifically to wear and tear and doesn't get limited by the other exclusions, I don't believe.
Right. And just another point is, if you have a policy and you have two provisions that contradict themselves, one where there's no coverage and the other where there actually is some type of coverage, the drafter of the policy, it goes against that drafter. So that would be the insurance company themselves. And therefore, in my opinion, and I know the courts in the state of Georgia would agree, that there would actually be coverage because it would be ambiguous at that point in time.
So the contract adhesion rules still apply then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Next question is rotten decking. I assume they mean under a roof. Hidden and above ceilings, should it be covered as an ensuing loss?
Typically, Matt, rotted decking is not a covered loss. I can't think of necessarily a policy that I've read where it actually states a provision if there is rotted decking on an actual roof structure or roof system that it's covered itself. So I would have to say that no, because an ensuing loss, for it to be an ensuing loss, it has to be actually covered in the policy. Rotted decking is always typically an exclusion in the policy.
There is the fungi, wet rot, dry rot, endorsements and things, but ultimately I don't think it would be an ensuing loss unless it was the result of an excluded loss to begin with. It has to start with the excluded loss to be an ensuing loss provision issue. So if we're talking about, I assume, like a wind or hail event, that's not excluded by the policy, then the rotten decking wouldn't be an ensuing loss of it. I mean, by the definition of it, it would be, but it wouldn't be something that you have to worry about that as as an additional coverage or the only way to get coverage. So the rotten decking for a wind or hail event would be included as part of the dwelling coverage A, because they have to have a proper nailing surface or something along those lines. It could also be ordinance and law.
See, that's what I was thinking. I know I've got actual rotted decking covered before many times in the past, and it's because I use ordinance and law coverage for that decking to be replaced because of the nailable surface.
Yeah, I mean, it's a code issue. I don't think that would be an ensuing loss provision. Can you give some examples of practical uses of ensuing loss in Georgia?
Yes. Ensuing loss when it comes to practical situations, and I guarantee every public adjuster in the state of Georgia has seen this, but maybe has not connected the dots to what it is. And that is when you go out to residential property or any commercial property. Residential property, and it's all state. Get up on the roof, you think it's hail damage, crease shingles all over the roof. However, Allstate says absolutely not. This is wear and tear. A week later, you get an estimate in the mail for your client, and that estimate doesn't pay for 1 penny on the roof. However, the estimate covers half a dozen rooms inside the actual house itself. That is an ensuing loss because they're saying that the actual roof itself is wear and tear. We all know wear and tear is excluded. If you find a policy where wear and tear is covered, please send it to me. I'd like to see it. But it's excluded. However, from that exclusion, water intrusion on direct physical damage to somebody's ceiling, that's covered loss.
Yeah, I see it all the time. Pipe boots that get deteriorated, that's part of the rot exclusion usually. The pipe boot itself wouldn't be covered, but the ceiling stains would be covered. That's why a lot of times the interior damage is included in an estimate, even if they're fighting you on other things. So the excluded cause of loss that starts it off would be wear and tear or rot or improper installation or something along those lines.
Right.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've had a few claims in the past where there was improper installation of flashing, usually around a chimney or possibly valleys or something like that. But the chimneys are really interesting, especially on masonry buildings. So if there is improper flashing and water gets in through that flashing area on the chimney, or improperly installed chimney cap, or the chimney cap is rusted out, all of those things are excluded. But if there's hidden damage language in the policy, if the damage is hidden behind ceilings, walls, and floors and unknown to the insured at that time, then any resultant loss, even if it's moldy and long-term and seepage, is included. I've had a few chimneys completely rebuilt, and the whole loss was an ensuing loss provision. We even filed it for improper installation.
Huh. So you turned a $20 piece of flashing into $15,000 worth of chimney work.
You know what, when you start getting into those chimneys, yeah. Some of them were, I think there were more than 15. I think ultimately they were probably above 30.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah. And that's funny, Matt, because that correlates what you said. $20 piece of flashing results into a chimney that costs over $30,000. And it relates back to the actual pinnacle case of ensuing loss in America, 1906, San Francisco. There was a very bad earthquake in California. Earthquakes and the policies over there were excluded. The damage from the earthquake was roughly about $30 million. However, the earthquake started fires. Fires was a covered cause of loss in the whole city of San Francisco. And this is back in 1906. The fires cost $600 million worth of damage. The courts in California said, guess what, insurance carrier? You're going to pay $600 million worth of damage.
Because that was the resultant loss of the earthquakes that was excluded, so the ensuing loss was the fire, and as long as it wasn't itself excluded, it was included. That's really what started this whole thing off, isn't it?
That's exactly right.
Was there a provision in those policies that had an ensuing loss written in, or is this something where that's where they decided to start writing that in?
Great question. There was not a provision in the policies for ensuing loss. Ensuing loss was a new noble type issue, but the courts themselves and the legislator of the state of California said, look, you're going to pay for this, and going forward, you will be paying for these losses as well.
Was it a approximate cause type doctrine that was in place at the time? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know that specifically.
Sure, that's what their argument was to begin with. That it's all stemmed from earthquake, and earthquake's excluded, so they don't.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
The insurance carrier, absolutely. That's exactly what they were doing.
Sounds a lot like the COVID situation we got going on.
That's exactly right. Very true.
All right, that's all the questions. I hope you enjoyed this video. We really enjoyed making it for you.
We certainly did. And I want to thank Matt for setting this up and us jumping around to different properties throughout the entire state of Georgia. I would like to thank everybody at All Good Adjustments for their support in this. We had a couple members at All Good help us out with this video, so I want to tip my cap to All Good. And hey, if you have any other additional questions about ensuing loss, do not hesitate to email Matt or I, or both of us. And we would love to have the conversations and answer any questions you may have.
I know both of us are very eager to help you guys out as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Thanks.